Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel. We have a member with us and there's a reason for that. Today I am going to be sharing with you my labor and delivery experience with him. Now I can formally introduce you guys to my son James, and my dog Mila is over here in the corner. You probably hear random noises from her from time to time. I decided to split this video into two parts, and the first part is going to be about 1 to 2 weeks prior to delivery, and then the second part is going to be my actual labor and delivery experience, just because there was so much that happened in both parts of it that I just figured it would be easier timestamp wise for me to split it up. So if you guys are interested in this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. So if you guys see me looking down at my phone, it's because I wrote a very descriptive note for each part in my phone just so I wouldn't forget anything. And so you'll probably see me looking down and reading from my phone a lot, just because, like I said, I just don't want to forget anything because it's a really crazy story, and he came and delivered in a very whirlwind experience. And as you can tell, it's been quite a while since I've delivered him. He will be 5 months old on Halloween. This is a very overdue video, and I just figured I would share it with you guys. And I am prepared for fussy baby because I have a bottle for him. So part 1 is 1 to 2 weeks prior to delivery. So I would say beginning around 37 weeks or so, I began experiencing some uncomfortable symptoms. I mean, my pregnancy with James was not an easy one. I think I had some kind of crazy symptom every trimester, every week. If you guys haven't seen the video of my pregnancy progression, I will tag that above here. But it was insane. It was a very crazy pregnancy for me, very symptomatic. From about my second trimester, I had a lot of issues with sciatic pain that would shoot down my lower back and down my leg. It was usually on my left side, and it was usually pretty bad. Like I said, I didn't think that my pregnancy symptoms could get worse than the sciatic pain, just because sometimes it would just leave me winded and like unable to completely stand up. But I was very wrong in terms of pain not being able to get worse than that. So my due date was Saturday, June 4th. And going back to 37 weeks, I think my most annoying symptom, my most annoying end of pregnancy symptom started kicking in. And that was swollen ankles and feet that people hear so much about. I didn't think I was going to get the swollen ankles and feet purely because I was 37 weeks pregnant and I was so far along in my pregnancy at this point. I didn't think that it could happen, and it did, and it came full force my last few weeks of pregnancy. This was around the time I believe Chris's mom came to visit us, and she came for the night. And Chris, his mother, and I decided to go to a local marketplace. It has 20 plus local businesses that you can go in and kind of like walk around. It's really cool actually. And it was our first time going. Oh, hi, are you introducing yourself? So while walking around, I started experiencing bad pains in my feet and ankles, which, I mean, I had some prior experience of this, so I knew what was happening. But when we returned back from the marketplace, we realized just how bad they were. My ankles were so swollen, I literally could not walk on them. I had to prop my feet up on pillows because they were so swollen. I couldn't even keep my socks on. I literally had, I think for the rest of my pregnancy, I wore, or at least I tried to avoid wearing sneakers and socks, because the compression of the socks would just make the swelling worse every time I would walk. I had to walk my dog and everything, so I usually wore sandals. Thank goodness it was warm at that point, because if I had to do that during the winter, that would have been very, very cold. The best way I can describe it is that they were like elephant trunks. But literally looked like I had cankles. I'll insert a picture of me at 37 weeks. I have a few pictures, but I'll just insert just any bump picture that I have. I honestly didn't think it would get worse and then I would get bigger, purely because I felt huge already and I was in so much pain. Like walking was becoming a problem. But believe it or not, I think I got bigger and it got even more painful the following week. So from then on, I started soaking my feet and taking baths with Epsom salt. The Epsom salt The Epsom salt I had is lavender scented, so not only did it smell nice, it was very relaxing for me. It would help with the swelling and it reduced joint pain because I had a lot of joint pain, not only with the sciatic pain, but I also was experiencing very bad lower back pain. It got to the point where the joint pain would affect my sleeping. You guys probably hear so much about that when people are pregnant, or you've experienced it yourselves because you've had babies. But have you ever been unable to physically turn over in bed without almost screaming in pain? Have you ever felt like you had something in between your legs when you actually didn't, that was making it near impossible to move or turn without a ton of pain? I felt like that for weeks during my 3rd trimester, but it intensified my last few weeks of pregnancy. I mean, I don't even know how I managed to get out of bed. I just remember I would scream or just groan and moan in pain every time I would make even just the slightest movement. Sleeping with pillows between my legs was a godsend. It didn't really help the pain, but it definitely, I couldn't sleep without the pillow between my legs. And that got worse because most days I am home 14 plus hours a day with my dog, and I was very, very pregnant, and getting up just to get out of bed, what I told you, is excruciating. Waddling and walking a dog and going down flights of stairs, that was almost impossible. I could barely walk her anymore. And I would feel winded just going up and down the stairs. I mean, it was horrible. I'd say probably my last, like my most excruciating symptoms, or most annoying symptoms, I would say, that returned. I mean, you'll see it from my progression video. I had really bad diarrhea during my pregnancy. I also have IBS, so I wasn't that surprised, but it definitely intensified my last couple of weeks of pregnancy. And on top of that, I also started getting really nauseous again, which was not fun because no one wants to get the nausea back that I had in the 1st trimester. I felt like I had morning sickness all over again. It was horrible. Like, I just couldn't do anything. I just wanted to sleep all the time. And pretty much I did. I took a lot of naps. At this point, between 36 to 38 weeks, I was going to weekly prenatal checkups. And the last time I was ever checked, cervically checked, was at 37 weeks, and this was before I switched OBs to a place closer to me. And that doctor would always check, but my new doctor didn't. My last cervical check was at 37 weeks. And at that point, I was 1 centimeter dilated and 10% effaced. So I was in the very, very beginning of starting to progress. I mean, I guess I can't complain, at least I was progressing, but like, there was no way they could tell me when I would go into actual labor. I thought it was going to be a very, very long time, just because you need to be 10 centimeters dilated and 100% effaced to give birth, and that felt a ways away.
Or so I thought I had time.
This little dude had other plans for me. But besides the uncomfortable symptoms like I just described, like the nausea and the diarrhea, I had 2 pretty consistent symptoms, and I had these for even more than a few weeks. At least one of them I had for more than a few weeks prior to giving birth, and that was Braxton Hicks contractions and lower back pain. So I had, because of the sciatic pain, I had lower back pain during most of my pregnancy, but I would say it felt worse. Like, it felt more intense. Nothing helped my back pain. I would put a back massager on it. I would soak in bath in order to relieve the pain, but nothing helped. It was just really, really intense. And the Braxton Hicks contractions, I think I had for up to 2 months prior, maybe a month. I'm not really sure when I started having them. I think it was about 2 months prior though, because I remember coming in April to visit this area with my friend, and I was having Braxton Hicks contractions. At that time I was only 31 weeks pregnant, but at that point they weren't that intense, and they were really far apart, and I would only have 1 or 2 a day. At this point, 1 to 2 weeks prior, I was having them like daily. I would have them at least, I was starting to experience about 4+ a day, and they would start to get really intense. So I knew, I had a feeling labor was on its way, but I obviously had no idea when, and I was just, at this point, like, I was terrified. I've always been scared of the idea of giving birth, but at this point I was so uncomfortable, I was just ready for it to happen. So like I said, talking about the baths, in order to try and relieve it, I would take 5 to 10 minute Epsom salt baths every night just in the hopes that I could sleep, because the nausea, the diarrhea, the back pain, everything was just intensifying and I could not sleep. It definitely helped because the scent of my Epsom salt was lavender, so that would kind of relax me a little bit, but there was no way I could get comfortable. Like, it was impossible. I'll insert a picture of me at 38 weeks pregnant too. At this point my belly started dropping, so I knew I was progressing, but like I said, I had no idea how much I was progressing because they stopped doing cervical checks on me. So I could have very well been 2 centimeters plus and I would have never known. I know now that I wasn't, but at the time I really thought I was progressing. I just remember, and this is kind of a funny story, my husband and I went into a store. I forgot what we were looking for. He was looking for something, but a woman asked me how far along I was, and I said about 38 weeks pregnant, and my belly had started to drop at this point. It was noticeable. I mean, if I'll put the side by side of my 37-week bump to my 38 weeks, you could see the difference. She took one look at me and she goes, first of all, she goes, "You're having a boy because you're carrying all friend." I mean, I know that that's different for everybody and it's dependent on your body type, but she just knew the way I was carrying that I was having a boy, and I've had a lot of family members that really believe that. So she was right on that, and I knew I was having a boy, so I told her I was. And she goes, you're gonna have him any day now. I would say in about a week you're going to go into labor. You're gonna have him very soon. And she wound up being right, because I had him about a week later. Just kind of crazy that she took one look at me, she's like,
"You're gonna have him soon, you've dropped a lot, like you're low."
And then I think the last excruciating, not really, I think the last symptom that I had was more annoying. It was uncomfortable, but it was like more annoying than anything. Hi little dude, are you smiling at me? Are you smiling at me? Do you want to look at the camera? This is about you. Hi, my little girl. Hi, baby. So I had excruciatingly painful and itchy skin on my belly. I know that that's common as well because your skin is stretching out so much during pregnancy, but it was definitely really bad the last week or so of my pregnancy, and it definitely got worse the night before I had him or went into labor with him. I'll insert a picture of my bare belly that I sent my friend with all the lovely stretch marks on it, but I couldn't help it. I was scratching. And might I add, I had very dry skin during my pregnancy. I was using lotion after lotion. I was using very mild unscented creams too, and I wound up having to use, I believe it was CeraVe moisturizing cream was the only thing I could use at the end of my pregnancy, because no other creams worked. Not even Eucerin. Nothing worked to heal the itching. I remember the last week or two I had to start implementing ice packs on my stomach in like a desperate hope that it would numb the itching and the pain, because not only was I itchy, my skin felt like it was on fire, like it was burning. I think I had it for even up to like a month prior to delivery, even earlier than that, but it got really bad my last couple of weeks. But I had heartburn really bad, and I believe I had some acid reflux as well. I'm not really sure where if the burning skin on my left upper abdomen was caused by heartburn or acid reflux, but it was bad. Like nothing worked. Tums didn't work, nothing calmed it. It was just really bad. But overall, I would say this was about what the last few weeks of pregnancy really were. And I think they were like this up until the night before labor. But now we will go on to part 2, where I discuss my actual labor and delivery. On the morning of May 30th, 2022, I was experiencing the same. The diarrhea, the itchy skin, the Braxton Hicks contractions, the nausea, and the bad lower back pain. Even the acid reflux and the heartburn. Like I said in part 1, at this point I was miserable and just ready to have him. I was scared though. Labor and delivery always was a fear of mine, but at this point I was so uncomfortable, could barely do anything. I was just ready to have him. I was also symptom tracking in the hopes that maybe any of these signs could be a sign of labor, especially because at 37 weeks they told me I was 1 centimeter dilated, so I was progressing. I just didn't know at that point at 39 weeks, 2 days, how far along in progression it was. I downloaded the contractions app on my phone just to keep track of how far apart my contractions were once like the real ones started. So how the app works is that after 4 contractions in a row, it will advise you if you have time before you should go to the hospital, advise you if they think you should start getting ready to go, or will advise you to go right away. So I started timing some Braxton Hicks contractions beginning at 6:17 p.m. Sunday, May 29th, which were all scattered and inconsistent, so I knew labor wasn't going to happen that night. There would be some that would be 4 to 6 minutes apart, making me wonder, are these real? Because normally the hospital will tell you if your contractions are anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes apart or even closer, go to the hospital. But then there would be other times when there would be 20 minutes to an hour in between the Braxton Hicks contractions, so I knew that they weren't for real. Then May 30th happened. I still have my times tracked on the app, so I can kind of go back and check in on the times, and I also have them written down on my notes here. So I started really progressing around 4:46 p.m. on Monday, May 30th. Like I said before, that everything else was sporadic in terms of duration of time and the frequency of them, so now to have them timing consistently was something new for me. And I knew this time it was more real because they were more intense and much more painful. Like Braxton Hicks are not the most comfortable, but they come and go, and it's more like, I don't know how to describe it, it kind of just feels like a tightness and then it instantly goes away. Contractions are much more intense, so once the intensity of the pain started picking up, I realized, oh, this is not fake anymore, these are not practice anymore, these are real. My contractions beginning at 4:46 p.m. would last for a minute or so, sometimes even less, and would occur about every 5 to 7 minutes on average. There were times where there was a couple of like 10-minute breaks in between, but the average was between 5 to 7 minutes at this point. I remember even trying to go grocery shopping with Chris, and let's just say I was leaning up against a pole in the middle of the grocery store having contractions while Chris was going grocery shopping, so that probably was not my smartest idea. I remember when we got back from grocery shopping, I don't know if this was late, this might have been later on, but I remember it being that evening. It might have been soon before I went to the hospital. I remember wanting to soak in the tub during contraction just because I thought it would relax me. And you'll see this through the rest of this part too, that there was no relaxing during my labor, but I couldn't relax because at this point my contractions had progressed to being anywhere from 3 to 6 minutes, so they were starting to get a little bit closer together. I believe this was closer to, because I believe we got back from grocery shopping around like 5:30, 6 o'clock. This might have been closer to like 7:30 to 8:30, so this was a little bit later. I don't really remember all the times in my head, but I remember this being very close to when we decided to go to the hospital. But at this point, my contractions were about 3 to 6 minutes apart, and I was timing them on the contractions app, which I have all the logs. And every time I would have one, I would time them. They were getting closer together and they were intensifying in pain. The worst part about it is, as they were intensifying, the contractions were starting to intensify and cause back labor, which is where most of my contractions were, was back labor. And this is why we decided later that evening, maybe only like a half hour or an hour later, we decided to go to the hospital to get checked. I also have a low pain tolerance, so I was in excruciating amounts of pain. I wasn't at that phase of like screaming yet, but I became very much audible and much more animalistic, to say the least. It definitely became more animalistic as I was more in active labor, but it definitely got to that point where it was audible, and no amount of Epsom salt would help relax me. It was go time. We had to go to the hospital. So basically I finished up taking the bath that was ineffective and got dressed. So after getting cleared by my OB to go to the hospital, because my contractions, like I said, were between 3 to 6 minutes apart, We left around 9 p.m. the first time. The hospital that we went to is about 30 minutes away from Chris and I, and the whole car ride, which you can imagine, I had back labor contractions. And the worst part, which I don't understand why they decided to do this, but they put a speed bump in the parking lot of the hospital. And when you're having contractions, not only is being in the car having contractions horrible, but like going over a speed bump, even if you're going 2 miles an hour, is super painful. But the problem is my water hadn't broken yet, but I was going off the fact that I was in pain and my contractions were super close together. I had no idea, like I said, since 37 weeks what I was dilated or even a phase 2. I switched OBGYNs about after the 37-week mark, so I went to a place closer to me, and my previous OB was doing them weekly, and then my other one didn't want to check because she was scared of increased chances of infection later on in pregnancy. So I had no idea if I had progressed or not. I thought I did. When we arrived at the hospital, I remember not even being able to walk. I remember limping to a bench right outside the hospital emergency door, or the main entrance door, because the pain was so intense. All of the back labor was just getting worse and worse. I remember Chris parking the car and then coming back to ask for a wheelchair. And I don't know if it was a security guard, the person manning the desk, but he came out and wheeled me upstairs to the labor and delivery unit of the hospital. And I was having back contractions the entire time up, and I believe it was 2 to 3 floors up. So due to the severity of the pain, they were a little concerned. Obviously I was progressing, I was laboring. They admitted me into triage for observation, and I was put into a gown. From there, they decided to finally do a cervical check on me. But to my shock, because of how bad the pain was, I was still only 1 centimeter dilated, but I had progressed in effacement to about 80%. So I didn't progress in dilation, but 70% effacement improvement. So I was progressing, just not the way they needed me to. They decided to keep me an hour, I believe, for observation. Just to see if I would progress, because technically they couldn't admit me because my water hadn't broken yet and I was not dilated enough. I believe you have to be 3 to 4 centimeters dilated to be admitted, even if your water doesn't break. So from 9:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. approximately, Chris and I sat in triage hoping that I would progress enough to be admitted, because I didn't really want to go all the way back because it was a 30-minute drive. So around 10:30 p.m. I was checked again. I was still 80% effaced and had only dilated to about 1.5 centimeters, so I only dilated or progressed 0.5 centimeter. They did give me the option to stay for another hour because they were concerned about my back labor. I was having back labor contractions the entire time I was in triage, which was awkward in itself because in the triage room we were in, I'm not sure if this is standard for most hospitals, but the one we were in, the only thing dividing us from another girl was a curtain. There was no privacy whatsoever. So getting up to go to the bathroom was interesting because her partner was there too, and we didn't know them. They were complete strangers and we were complete strangers to them. So they kept me for another hour because I opted to stay for an extra hour just in the hopes that I would progress. So around 11:30 rolled around and I was checked again, but I hadn't progressed at all. I was still 1.5 centimeters dilated and about 80% effaced, but my water still hadn't broken. They did also give me another option to stay for another 1 to 2 hours, and then gave me the option as well to go home and labor so that I would be more comfortable, only because there was nothing they really could do to help me out. And also they didn't know how long it would take for me to progress. They said it could take anywhere from like a few hours to days. So I opted to go home, which was probably a bad idea in hindsight now that I know how my labor went. I opted to go home and labor in the comfort of my own space just because I wanted more privacy to labor. On top of that, the nurses advised me, because I was in so much pain, they advised me when I got home to take some Benadryl to help me sleep so that I could get more comfortable, and I was extremely tired. Like, I don't remember, I think I woke up early that morning and just couldn't sleep because I was in so much pain. So I was really exhausted and they wanted me to have energy in case I went into labor that night. So when Chris and I got home, it was around midnight. So we have a sleeper sofa downstairs, and we opted to set up a bed down there for me because there was no way I was going to be able to walk up and down the stairs with contractions. Thankfully there's a bathroom downstairs too, so it makes everything a little easier, which wound up being like the best idea possible. Interestingly enough, I didn't progress to the hospital, but once I was home, everything progressed super quickly.
Like rapidly.
So I took the Benadryl as advised, but all it did was make me drowsy. So what felt instantaneous, like I said, was that my contractions intensified in both pain and frequency. They started coming on about 1 to 2 minutes apart, so they were frequent and almost constant. So I had no breaks really between the pain, and they were even more painful than they were in the hospital, and I was getting to the point where I was starting to scream, almost nearly scream, not really scream yet, in the hospital. So you can imagine how much noise I was making. So Chris was trying to get me to lay down and get some sleep because we didn't know how long I was going to be laboring for, but I physically was unable to lay down. I remember laboring on all fours on the bed, trying to lay down. Like I would try to lean my arms downward on the bed, and I would instantly have another contraction when I would try to lay down, or if I managed to kind of lay down, I would get a pinch in my back and then I would have another contraction and have to instantly get back up on all fours to labor. Another thing that was weird is I also felt like I had to go to the bathroom the entire time. All my contractions felt like a lot of pressure, like I had to, you know, go number 2. Even though I knew in my head deep down that I didn't actually have to go to the bathroom, but like I had to like try and go to the bathroom, if that makes sense. A lot of times when I felt that urge, I would get up and go to the bathroom to try and labor on the toilet, thinking maybe I would go to the bathroom in the process because I felt like that. And then I'd attempt to get up to go back to sleep, even though sleep was not a thing that was gonna happen. But then I would have another contraction once I would get off the toilet, and then I would go down on all fours on the floor in the bathroom and have other contractions and labor on the floor in the bathroom. This was a constant back and forth for the whole time I was laboring at home. I would go to the bed, labor on all fours, think I have to go to the bathroom, then I would go to the bathroom and then contract on the toilet, and then I would go on the floor, go on all fours, have more contractions and scream and moan in pain. And Chris would be like, huh, you don't have to go to the bathroom, you're just having contractions. But for some reason, having contractions on the toilet was a little more relaxing for me than attempting to lay down and failing. So I believe the time that we got home, which was midnight, to the time we left for the hospital was about 2.5 hours. It really wasn't that long. I think we left about 2:45 in the morning. We got home around midnight. So yeah, it was about 2.5 hours long. So during one of my contractions, this was another time I was laboring on the toilet. I remember feeling like a strange sensation, like it was painful, but well, the sensation wasn't painful. That was just the contractions really painful. Alongside the back labor, I felt a weird, strange sensation. I don't even know how to describe it because I barely remember it, but I just remember it being different. And when I looked down, I realized that I had lost my mucus plug. A little bit of TMI for those of you who have never experienced labor. I had lost my mucus plug on the toilet. I was kind of grateful I did it on the toilet and not like in bed, because that would have been pretty messy. And I had started bleeding in the toilet as well. So by this time I knew it was time to go back to the hospital, because normally if you start bleeding they want you admitted for checking. So I have to tell the story just because it was so ridiculous. I laugh at it now because it's absolutely ridiculous. But so when I called my OB office back, I believe it was around 2:30 or so at this time, I was trying to let them know that my mucus plug came out and that I was bleeding. So the woman was trying to pull up my name so that, you know, to see if I was on record and see if they can admit me and everything. And at one point I had to, for most of the call, I had to have Chris finish the phone call with the woman who was trying to admit me, because I was just having so many back-to-back contractions and I was in so much pain I could barely talk anymore. So the woman kept spelling my name wrong, so she couldn't find my name on this one because she was spelling it REFFLET, instead of Reffelt. And I think this was about 5 minutes of back and forth between me and Chris and this woman trying to get her to spell my name right in the system, because it was just taking so much time away from me, like getting approval to go to the hospital. So that was kind of funny. It wasn't funny at the time, I was kind of agitated, but it's kind of funny now when you look back on it. But once she finally spelled my name right and pulled up the information, I was obviously cleared to go back to the hospital. While Chris, you know, went and got the car ready, he wound up putting a couple of towels down on his passenger seat, which wound up being the best thing he could have done. I was basically having contractions on all fours on the floor in the bathroom, because that's where I finished laboring. And at this point I could barely stand up. It hurt so bad to even try to get up. And he was telling me, we need to go, we need to go, we need to go. And he was I think he was panicking. He'll deny that, but I think he was kind of freaking out because he didn't know what to expect, you know. I said that I couldn't get up because I felt like I couldn't, and continued to labor on the floor and screaming, because at this point I was in so much pain. I was just in agonizing pain, screaming kind of animalistically, and then in a sarcastic manner, which now it's kind of funny, but I was not happy with him at this point. But he basically said in a sarcastic tone,
well, I guess you're giving birth on the bathroom floor then.
and then went back to the car to finish getting everything set up. Yeah, it's kind of funny when I think about it. So, in pain and stumbling, because I could barely walk, I was basically hunched over, leaning against the wall to get out. I made it to the car. Pretty much as soon as I sat down in the car, my water started to break, so it was perfect timing. It was about 2:45 a.m. at this point that my water started breaking. We were on our way to the hospital, and like I said, the hospital is 30 minutes away. It wasn't like you had this huge gush and all your water's gone. For me, it was multiple gushes of water, so I kind of felt like I was just continuously peeing myself. It was not very comfortable. It was really gross, actually. What no one says is that it's warm. The water is really warm when it comes out, but it was just very gross, like mucusy and wet, and yeah, TMI, I know. And that was the whole drive. I was losing water the entire drive to the hospital, pretty much screaming my head off, because at this point the contractions were so bad, and it was all back labor, and I was screaming my head off, holding onto the handle in Chris's car like this, like gripping it for dear life. So we arrived at the hospital around 3:15 a.m. and this is another sarcastic thing. I don't think he meant it sarcastically, but it came off sarcastic. When we got into the parking lot, going over that dreadful speed bump again, he goes,
Babe, I know you're in pain, but could you try to quiet it down a little bit?
Because he had a hard time focusing on the drive, because I was basically screaming in his ear the whole drive. I was uncontrollable, and I even told him like I couldn't help it because the pain was so severe. And at this time we knew we would be admitted, because not only did I lose my mucus plug and start bleeding, I was also, you know, my water had broken, so they have to admit you. But we really thought, because we had no idea, we really only thought I would be 3 to 4 centimeters dilated, or at least I thought I would only be 3 to 4 centimeters dilated, and then it would be like most standard labors where they would admit you, put you in a gown, and then I could maybe get the epidural to kind of relax me a little bit. But I guess that wasn't in the cards for me. Think about it as a movie, like of all the pregnancies and all the labor and deliveries you see in every single movie. Chris, basically, like, they heard me screaming outside the hospital. The person at the front desk, I believe it was someone different, asked if I was okay, and Chris basically went in and grabbed a wheelchair and raced me back to the labor and delivery unit. Like, he raced me while I was screaming. My water is still breaking, gushing. I'm soaked at this point. I think when they admitted us, it was around 3:30 in the morning or so. I'm not really sure on the specific times, but I'm gonna guess it was around that time. And that's how quick everything moved. It was so fast. We didn't even sign the admission papers into the hospital until after I had the baby. That's how crazy this labor and delivery story is. So when they finally did admit us in the room, they had me attempt to stand so they can check my cervix just to see how dilated I was. I add, as you can imagine, it's super hard to stand up when you are in full-on active labor. So basically I was leaning on the table in this tiny room while they examined me standing up. When they checked me, and to my shock, as you can imagine, I was told by, I don't know if it was a nurse practitioner, I'm not really sure, who checked me that and told me I was 10 plus 2 centimeters dilated, which I didn't think was possible. I was basically, he was coming out. I was shocked and terrified. Like, I just like looked at this wound like deer in headlights. I said,
so no epidural?
Because I really, really wanted the epidural. Like, I wanted to do this with pain medication. To which they basically responded,
no, there's no time. Your son has other plans.
and before I realized it, my clothes soiled from my water breaking. I mean, they were destroyed. They put them in a clear bag and put me in a hospital gown. They brought me into, it wasn't all in the same room, like the office was adjoined to the space I had my baby in. So they put me into an adjoined room. So we went from a room with bright lights to a room with very dim lighting. Then placed me on the delivery table, got my feet, I think they called them the stirrups. So they put me in position for delivery, and basically they told me that they were going to begin pushing once everyone was in the room, and they were running around frantic, like setting everything up. I was going to deliver my son natural. Totally not what I had in mind for my delivery, but I had no choice. My son, like they said, had other plans for me. So before I started pushing, I remember Chris sending out group messages to his family, his mom, his brother, my sister-in-law, and my family, like my parents and everything, saying that they were about to become uncles, aunts, and grandparents. We weren't really expecting many responses at 3:30 in the morning just because it was so late in the middle of the night and it was a Tuesday, so we weren't expecting anything from anybody. And from there, I started pushing. I remember there being at least 4 nurses/nurse practitioners. Like I said, I don't really remember what their titles were. Didn't really have much time to really get to know them, and they were all females, so I was kind of happy about that. So basically the whole time they were basically encouraging me to push, because my momentum was just poor, because not only, like I said, do I have a low pain tolerance, I also was on Benadryl, so I was super drowsy. I also just remember like looking above me the whole time because there was what looked like glass on the ceiling, like colored glass on the ceiling, and I was just staring at myself the whole time I was delivering, but I couldn't see like him coming out because at the angle it was out I could only really see like my legs being upward. Even when they asked me if I wanted a mirror, I kind of opted not to because I didn't want to see that. So every push was excruciating, very, very painful for me. I asked Chris about this later on because, you know, when you're in it, you don't really realize what's going on. So according to Chris, James's head would start to come out, but then his head would go back in because I would lose momentum and I would stop pushing. Even when they told me not to, I would give up. I even remember, because of it being so painful, I remember asking if his head was out yet because I had so much pressure, obviously, and the ring of fire was very strong when I was pushing him out. And of course they told me no, his head wasn't out. He would basically peek out, then he would go back in because I didn't have the momentum really to push him. And they just kept telling me to keep pushing, and then they would encourage me, telling me I was doing a great job. But eventually, due to the fact that, you know, I kept stopping during the push, I remember vividly, like this is like, it was a flash before my eyes. Like one moment they were like,
Christina, you need to push, you need to push.
And then after that, because I kept saying I
can't,
I'm in too much pain and give up, I remember I think all of them, or at least most of the women, coming over helping to pull his head out, so I had a lot of help with his delivery. From there, I don't really remember the pain once his head was out. I think it was all a real blur once the women came over and pulled him out. I just really remember him crying and being out. Backtracking a little bit. So from midnight to 3:30, I was in active labor. And from approximately 3:34 a.m. to 3:45 a.m. when my son was born, it took 11 minutes once I started pushing for James to come out and enter the world. But it felt much, much longer for me. So I remember after he was first born, I remember them instantly putting him on my chest, cleaning him off. Chris cut the cord, which shocks me. I didn't see it. I think I was just too blindsided by like how whirlwind, like how crazy fast my labor was. But I remember him and I discussing that him cutting the cord, and he wasn't sure about it because he thought he would be grossed out because he's a very squeamish person. And then from there, I opted to have him weighed and measured right away just because I was curious. And according to what I was told and from what I saw, he weighed 7 pounds 10 ounces, I can tell you one thing, I was very shocked by his weight because I didn't eat that much when I was pregnant. I had a very little appetite when I was pregnant, so I expected him to be a little, at least 7 something, but I didn't expect him to be 7 pounds 10 ounces. And he was 21 inches long, which shocks me too because my husband and I are both extremely short people, so I didn't expect him to be very long. When I was watching him being weighed and measured and everything, they had me deliver my placenta, which that didn't hurt at all. That was actually felt like a heating pad. A little TMI there, but it didn't hurt at all. Like, I barely felt it. And from there, they put him in a diaper on my chest for skin to skin, and while they stitched me up, I wound up getting really lucky in the sense that with how crazy my labor was, with so many people sticking their hands in there to get him out, I expected to have more of a tear than I did. I only had a first-degree tear, and it was 1 stitch that I needed, and they said it was barely a first-degree tear. They only qualify it because I did need a stitch, but it was basically a laceration, so I got really fortunate there. Although I did bleed a lot, and I bled for like 7 weeks straight with how little I tore. But overall, it was a really crazy labor experience. I expected much different because everyone always says, oh, your first labor is always the longest. It's, you know, you might be in labor for like 15 to 20 hours. So I expected that, and I expected to have time to like get the epidural and to relax and to even sleep. Clearly I didn't have that experience. My labor was so fast, like 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours of active labor is insane. And from the time that my contraction started, which I said was around 4:46 p.m. to the time I delivered was 11 hours total. So that's a lot. That's very little time. 11 hours between the beginning of real contractions to his birth. That's whirlwind fast. And everyone says you forget. I don't think this is an experience I'll forget. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Comment down below what you guys want to see next, and I will see you next time for more videos. Thanks, guys.
7 ounces. He was well fed. He's your kid.